Hello viewers, Tom O here. Today's episode I am going to be covering the filter change and fluid flush on this 2005 Dodge Grand Caravan. This should apply to model years as far back as 1999 and up to 2007 with the V6 engine. Please check your manual and compare this video to your actual vehicle before proceeding. Also, check your manual to find out exactly which fluid your transmission takes. Now, you may have heard some people say, or even in your manual, that there's no service needed on your transmission, that the fluid's good for the life of the transmission. In the opinion of the manufacturer, that's true, because as far as the manufacturer is concerned, your vehicle should only last 100,000 miles. If you change the fluid and filter on this vehicle, on the transmission, every 50,000 miles, you can get 300,000 miles out of your transmission, and I typically get about 300,000 miles out of my Grand Caravans. That being said, though, this procedure is for vehicles whose transmissions are in good condition. Check your fluid. If it's clear and it's red, you should be fine to proceed. If your fluid is brown and smells burnt, that could get a little risky. It should still be okay. My personal opinion is that if the fluid's burnt, you're better off changing it, because you're going to do more damage with burnt fluid than you will with new clean fluid. Thing is, you don't know what condition your transmission is actually in. Now, if your transmission fluid is sludgy, it's no longer clear, it's visibly just dirty, old dirty fluid, then stop. That gets very risky. Your transmission, the engine is linked to the transmission through the torque converter, and the torque converter uses friction in order to transfer that power. If it's worn out, the only thing providing the friction is that dirty fluid. So you go changing it with fresh, clean, slippery fluid, you might get to the end of your driveway and then it'll be all over. So proceed with caution in that respect. All that being said, let's get started. So some of the things you're going to need to do this job will be the synthetic fluid. Figure on having 10 quarts on hand, because it's going to take at least 9 quarts for the full flush. Filter and gasket. If it's not a rubber gasket, like this one's a felt, so it's felt, paper, or cork. I like to use a gasket sealant along with it. You can use the stuff in the tube, or I use the spray stuff. That is optional. Something to suck fluid out will make the job easier. That's optional also. This thing's a piece of junk. It fights with me every time. It falls apart. So if you see one on the shelf, if it's $8, $5, buy it. Otherwise, stay away. But it does make it easier if you suck the fluid out through the dipstick tube. Otherwise, when you pull that pan off, you're going to have about 4 quarts just come gushing out of the pan. So by getting it out ahead of time just makes it easier. And then you're going to need a wide pan in order to catch the fluid underneath. Don't go too small. You'll just wind up with fluid everywhere. Okay, that's not grape juice. I suctioned out roughly 3.5 quarts of transmission fluid. Okay, now this is the transmission pan. I'm sure there's at least half a quart of fluid in there, if not more. Just have to remove these bolts. It's the original to the vans. That means this pan is sealed on with RTV black silicone instead of a gasket, and that will be the slowest part of this whole job. Is first of all getting this thing to pry off of the transmission, because it's literally glued on there. I'm sure they build this transmission, glue the pan on, and then 2 weeks later, after it's dry and it's at the factory, they finally fill it with the fluid as the last step. So this does not come off willingly. And then the second half is you got to get every bit of that silicone off of both the pan and the mating surface on the transmission. So let me get those bolts off, and then I'll try to find a good place to pry, which might be right there. It's been a while, I forget where the best spot is. Okay, I didn't bother taking the wheel off. I only have the driver's side up on a jack stand. Chocks on the wheels, parking brake on. I've removed all the bolts. I left these 2 bolts in halfway to act as a hinge. When you're ratcheting it off, it's 10mm ratchet. Use a 6-point ratchet. Don't get one with the 12 points inside. Just because these mild steel, they will have a tendency to try to round over on you, because initially they're in there pretty snug and they're held in there also with silicone. So use that, and once you get it broken loose, wiggle this around to get it off the bolt. If your bolts are all clean, you may not have that problem, but each one of them, the ratchet didn't want to come off the bolt for me. And I'm thinking I pry it, if I remember right, I pry it loose right here with a screwdriver. Have a pan under it, because you're going to have a waterfall of transmission fluid at that point, especially if you haven't sucked any of it out of there. Okay, I used a pry bar, and I pried right along here and along here. Went back and forth a few times. Slow, steady pressure. You don't want to bend, distort the pan. So just put steady pressure on it and just hold it, and slowly you'll hear that silicone starting to break free. As you hear that, just keep the pressure on, and then it's going to pop open. Since I pre-drained it, I only had about maybe half a quart pour out. So if you don't drain it, be ready for, you know, literally 4 quarts are just going to come gushing out. And now I'll remove these 2 bolts, and the next step will be to clean off all of this silicone. Now once you get the pan off, you want to look and see what you see. In the corner there should be a magnet, and that will collect any metal shavings. And you see there's a little bit of sludgy metal. That is normal. That is actually one of the reasons why you should change the fluid, and you should change it to synthetic, is because one of the parts on your car that's going to wear are the clutch plates, and by having the synthetic, you're going to hopefully reduce the wear and tear on those. That is another reason why, if your fluid is black and sludgy, you actually should not change the fluid. Contrary to popular belief, your transmission will not burn out by changing the fluid. It will not cause your transmission to fail by changing the fluid. The reality is your transmission has already failed, but all that sludge in the fluid is what is allowing your clutch plates to grab. By changing your fluid, you wash all that away. Well, now the brand new fluid will just act as a lubricant on your worn out clutch plates, and your transmission will slip and you won't go anywhere. Okay, the best thing for cleaning the surface, mating surface of the transmission gasket, is a combination of a cut up credit card, how to use several pieces, and your fingernail. Nothing seems to work better than that. Scotch-Brite pads I never use on an assembly that's on the vehicle, just because there's sand in there, there's grit in there, and I don't want that getting into the transmission. Okay, to clean the pan itself, initially started out with a utility blade to cut off the majority of the silicone. Then I tried using the drill with the Scotch-Brite pad. That was a disaster. It really wanted to take the metal away and not take the gasket. So then I switched over to using credit card, Scotch-Brite pad with soap and water. After that was done, I cleaned it all up with more soap and water, and then Any residual that was there, I scraped it off with the utility blade or the piece of credit card, scrubbed it some more with the Scotch-Brite pad until finally I got it all off of there. Then cleaned everything up with soap and water, and then brake cleaner. Got my magnet cleaned as much as I possibly could. On the underside of the pan, since I'm going to want to tighten the bolts in a crisscross pattern, I numbered them all. And I also wrote on there how many foot-pounds I want to torque that I want to torque those bolts to. The old filter just pulls right off. And when it does, make sure that the O-ring comes out with it. And I think it fell somewhere. There it is. That will be on the spout of the filter, and the new filter comes with an O-ring there, and it just pops right back into the same spot. Okay, I cleaned off the threads of all the bolts, and I put 2 little lines of anti-seize on there because these are mild steel bolts going into cast aluminum, and they will no longer have the silicone coating on them like it did previously. Okay, I used my torque wrench. First I went through and tightened it down to 9 foot-pounds, and then after that I moved it up to actually about 11.5 foot-pounds, and then I went through the 1 through 14 again, because as you tighten them down I find that the first 1 through 7 usually winds up feeling a little looser. And just if you have this type of torque wrench, digital one would be better, but be real careful, because it's easy. Sometimes you're tightening and you'll actually go beyond the torque and it won't click. This has been my experience. So I'll tighten a little bit, let go, tighten a little bit, let go, until finally it'll click. And that seems to be more accurate that way. Okay, now we're going to go on to flushing. Now, to get an idea where these hoses are. This one and that one go to the transmission cooler. This one goes to the transmission cooler, that one comes back and empties the cooled fluid back into the transmission, and that's the one you're going to want to disconnect. If you have an older model, it may just be a black hydraulic hose hooked on there with a clamp. Easy enough, loosen the clamp, pull the hose off, and drop it into your container. In my case, you don't undo this bolt, that nut there, that fitting. Instead, there's a little metal clip there. You're going to pry it out with a small screwdriver, and do that with both hands. I'm not going to do it on camera just for that reason. You're going to pry that clip out with both hands so you don't go losing it, because I don't know if the dealer would have that part on hand. So, and then after that, you'll pull that tube out and drop it into your container. I'm going to use a gallon container, and on to the next step. Okay, that's what the clip looks like, and when you're taking it off, I would recommend you pack the area, you can see it here, with paper towels, cloth, whatever, so if that piece drops, you're able to catch it. Okay, I have my gallon container sitting on top of my collection pan, which I've already emptied. Lowered the van a little bit so that the hose can't come out of the gallon bottle. I already got 1 gallon out of there. And the van transmission holds roughly 9.5 quarts. So first thing I'm going to do is pour probably about 6 quarts into the transmission, and then once you start the engine, it's going to pump into that gallon bottle, and I'm going to, as it's pumping in, I'm going to be pouring fluid into the funnel as quick as I possibly can, and then I'm going to turn the engine off and check the bottle. This is easier done with 2 people. That bottle will fill up faster than you can pour this transmission fluid in. So that's why I'm going to be turning off the transmission, turning off the engine, then pouring more in and turning it back on again. Okay, so that is it for doing a filter change and fluid flush on your 2005 through 2007 Dodge Grand Caravan, Town and Country. A few helpful hints that I will give you having done this. Number one is when you're doing the flush, do it with 2 people, or even 3 would be better. You know, 1 person behind the ignition, the other person filling, 3rd person watching the jug. Having done it by myself, it was a challenge and it was much slower. Number 2 is when you first turn on the engine and you're watching that jug, there is 20-30 second delay maybe before the jug starts filling up, as the fluid fills up the transmission cooler first before fluid will start coming out. And lastly, if you want your transmission to really last, between filter changes once a year, through the dipstick tube, suction out 3 quarts, 4 quarts, as much as you can get out, and put in fresh fluid. If you do that every year, your transmission will last you a long time. If you like this video, please like, share, and of course, hit that subscribe button. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time.